All right, let's talk Kansas City Chiefs training camp in full swing. Of course, a lot of great news out of Kansas City. A lot of young guys, a lot of new Chiefs stepping up, making a name for themselves. And there's one guy in particular that's drawing a lot of praise from the Chiefs coaching staff, both by what they're saying and by what the Chiefs coaches are doing with this young prospect. I think the Chiefs have a great find here, which we'll get to in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick, that is Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Kansas City Chiefs are obviously one of the biggest names in football. They are the current dynasty in the National Football League. That Super Bowl defeat a few months ago, notwithstanding. And with that becomes a lot of attention. And there hasn't been a 7th round selection getting more attention this offseason than potentially Chiefs running back / wide receiver / do-it-all guy, Bashard Smith. He has a great future in front of him based on what a lot of people said about him through the draft process, and what he's doing in training camp points to a really strong future as well. Let's get into the latest articles when it comes to Smith, and then we'll get into some interesting data on the other side. This first report is from SI.com. Some good news came from Coach Taub following the first week of training camp, revolving around 2 of the Chiefs' 2025 NFL draft picks. While Coach Taub figures out who to use in the punt return role, 7th round pick out of SMU, Bashard Smith, has already gotten high praise from his new coach, talking special teams here. I'm excited about Bashard. He keeps getting better and better. Didn't do a lot in college, so this is new to him, but he's a really good catcher, Coach Taub told the media on Friday. And then underneath there, we've got a report. This is from a few days ago from Nick Jacobs. Bashard Smith and Jalen Royals, another Chiefs rookie, very promising, working in with the ones during install. All right, so let's pack this two together here real quick. So we talk about Taub, we're talking about special teams. Bashard Smith, early on in his Chiefs career, will most likely have to make his bones as a special teams player. Not uncommon. For example, Tyreek Hill had to go the same route, of course, 7th round selection. Be punt returner, kick returner, whatever you got to do to get on the field early on, make a name for yourself. You got to do it on special teams. So the fact that he's doing good things there, even though he doesn't have a lot of special teams experience necessarily, impressing Coach Taub, that's a great sign, because Bashard Smith has a lot of potential as a running back, receiver, weapon for this Chiefs offense. And that second report there, running with the first string during install, is very important. So install, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the Chiefs coaching staff and the Chiefs players just going through the plays. Hey, we're installing, we're reviewing, getting everyone on the same page, our base run plays, our base pass plays. So Smith being with the first string when that's going on is a sign that the Chiefs coaching staff, they want him brought up to speed mentally, so that way later in the season, or earlier if he's ready, but later in the season, maybe a postseason push, he can be ready to step up in a bunch of different roles. So they're trying to get him mentally prepared for the offense while getting him physical reps on special teams. They view Smith, I think correctly, as a dynamic weapon for this offense, but he may not be ready yet physically. They've got a lot of good running backs already on the roster, some veteran guys. Let's get him on special teams first, and the fact that he's doing well there is a great sign, because the last thing you would want to do is have a guy like Smith on your roster who's a great long-term play as a developmental prospect, as an offensive weapon, but he stinks at special teams in the meantime, so you're stuck, right? You play a bad special teams player because you think he can develop. Good news is that's not the case. He's doing well on special teams, according to Coach Taub. But when you get into the data for Smith, it gets very interesting. Let's pull up our first graphic here to highlight what I'm talking about. So this is Bashard Smith versus mid-tier running back prospects from the 2025 class. And normally with running backs, obviously they're running backs, so you expect them to be really good at running the football. So we got receiving grade in blue, rushing grade in red here. But when a lot of times, if you have a good receiving running back, they are very poor in rushing, and usually most running backs, they aren't very good in receiving either. So if you look at the 4 guys highlighted there, Jarquez Hunter, good guy for the Rams out of Auburn. He's going to be a good player. Caleb Johnson, the Steelers, he's going to be good. Jadon Blue, a lot of high praise for him already at Dallas. And then, of course, Smith on the right. And you could see, just a quick glance, Smith's grades are better than these guys. His receiving grade significantly better. His rushing grade is actually better than a lot of them, right at the same level, for example, as a guy like Caleb Johnson. So we're looking at a prospect here in Bashard Smith where it's very bizarre, where his rushing grade is at a high level. With most other mid-tier running backs, that means your receiving grade takes a dip, but actually that's not the case with Smith. His receiving grade is actually higher than his rushing grade. You talk about a dynamic player, an outstanding weapon. This is exactly what the Chiefs have been looking for. We've talked about Smith taking on this role this offseason. Again, based on what he's doing in training camp so far and based on the data, he seems poised to do just that. And let's go into one more chart here to kind of highlight why this will be valuable. So what I looked at here and plotted was basically the Chiefs' EPA per game rushing the football, that's in the x-axis, and their pass throwing EPA per game, that's in the y-axis. So those of you who aren't familiar with EPA, expected points added, it's basically just an efficiency on a play-by-play metric, looking at whether you are rushing the football, in this case on the x-axis, throwing the ball on the y-axis. And you can see the Chiefs basically right in the middle of the pack there. You can see on the right, there's a lot of good teams: the Lions, the Ravens, the Eagles, right? All to the right. The Bills, a lot of the Chiefs competition there is all to the right, especially the big guys in the AFC or potentially a matchup in the Super Bowl. So this is just an efficiency metric, rushing and receiving. So the Chiefs have a little bit of a dilemma. If they would have gone out and gotten, let's say, an elite rusher, then they improve their rushing game, but the receiving game dips. If they go out and get a great receiving running back who can't run the football, okay, the receiving grade may improve, but the rushing grade may dip. They had to find a way to get a guy who could do both to move closer following that diagonal to those top contenders when it comes to this metric, and they got it done with Bashard Smith, and they got it in the 7th round. Now, Smith isn't without his flaws, and there's a long way to go, but based on what he's doing with training camp, based on what the coaches are saying and doing with Smith, based on the data, I think the Chiefs have one of the better finds of the 2025 class, and it's great to see Bashard Smith off to such a good start. He's definitely He's definitely one to keep an eye on throughout training camp in the preseason, and I think before long he'll start off as a big special teams ace before very, very quickly. I think by middle of the season, certainly by the end, he'll be moving into a big time contributor on offense. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. But first, Chiefs fans, Chiefs Kingdom, in the comment section below, got a very interesting question for you guys here today. Who, in your opinion, is the greatest receiving running back in Chiefs history, right? A lot of different ways you could go here, right? There's some really great rushers that were also great receivers, but I can think of a few guys that were sort of predominantly receiving third down running backs. So in the comment section below, give us your greatest Chiefs receiving running back in team history. Again, put them in the comment section. And while you're down there, make sure you sign up for our weekly newsletter, courtesy of the Substack platform, 100% free. It's extra content, doesn't cost you anything. Again, link in the description below. Click on it, sign up, helps us out. Again, 100% free. But Miles, let me throw it over to you now. What are your thoughts on this latest out of Kansas City?
Yeah, Nick, I love Bashard Smith. I think he's a really excellent pickup for the Chiefs. I think this is going to be the next big player for the Chiefs. They always seem to find some late round guy, comes slots in here, does some really great stuff. But the key for me here is when you look at Smith here, and you look at the first chart that you brought up, and you saw, great receiving grade, but he still had a pretty good rushing grade comparatively to all those other mid-tier running backs, who, by the way, are all guys that are looking great in their own right in their training camps as well, where we like a lot of those guys as well. So this is a guy who, great receiver, really high receiving grade, but already a pretty good running grade, if better, if not almost exactly the same as all those other guys. And this was his first year as a running back. This is a guy in Smith who, at 3 years at Miami before he came to SMU, everybody knows this, but he was a receiver. He was, getting 20, 30 balls a year, nothing insane, getting 300-ish yards per season. But you look, this year is the first year he actually got any significant time at the running back position. In 2021, he got 6 carries. In 2022, got 5. 2023, got 9. And then in 2024, once he moves over to SMU, got 232 carries. Absolutely blew it out of the water in the rushing department. So I think as good as he is as a running back, this is just the beginning. He has to learn the nuances. He has to learn the cuts. He has to learn to read the holes. He has to learn all of that stuff. And I think he's just going to get better as a rusher for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think this guy, very talented receiver, as I said, 3 years at Miami, and he continued and even got better production at SMU, even so getting all those carries at the running back position as well. So this is a guy who is a talented receiver. He can catch the ball very well, but I think he's in the infancy as his runner, and in the infancy as a runner, he is so good already. Had very high production last year and looked really, really talented as a runner of the football. So if I'm a Chiefs fan, I'm excited because not only is this guy going to start out, like you said, and be a productive member of this team, I think there's room for him to grow each year, and I expect him to look to make leaps and bounds in the rushing attack. I think he's going to become a much more polished rusher, especially, getting into the NFL level of running the ball, learning all of those nuances. This is a guy who has a lot of room to grow. I think he's also a talented receiver, but that's what I would say here. Look to him to grow as a rusher. I think we haven't even seen the tip of the spear as far as what Bashard Smith can bring to the table. This guy looks like he is potentially one of the bigger steals the Chiefs got this season.
And it's all part of a sort of new Chiefs strategy to kind of use an aggregate amount of skill players to create sort of a flurry of matchup nightmares, right? So if you go back 5 years ago, it was basically Tyreek Hill and a couple other speedsters that just basically opened up the entire field, and opposing defenses didn't know how to handle the Chiefs. But now when you look at the Chiefs structure now, it's a bunch of different guys that may not be, for example, Worthy's a speedster, but at this point we don't know if he's going to be as good as Tyreek Hill, high bar to meet, of course. But you look at just at the aggregate amount of skill players that Chiefs have, they're creating a situation where opposing defenses aren't going to know how to react, right? So let's say we get in the huddle and there's three Chiefs wide receivers, there's Kelsey and there's Bashard Smith. If you're an opposing defense, they could come out in five wide. And now you're like, okay, we got to make sure we've got, a quarter person package in there with 7 defensive backs. Or they could come out like an 11 personnel, 1 tight end, 1 running back, and run it right at you with Bashard Smith as the tailback. Now you got to come out and be prepared to do that as well. So what do? Those are two completely different defensive schemes. And then it completely throws into a loop because then they can line up in a package, let's say 11 personnel, and then shift to 5 wide. So now you're totally screwed. So not only did you get the personnel package wrong, now you're shifted completely out of focus. What happens? A smart quarterback like Patrick Mahomes tears you apart. These little matchup things, it doesn't make the headlines, it doesn't dominate the coverage, but it really makes a difference, right? Usually these matchups are best served when it's a superstar player like a Hill was, or like, say, a Justin Jefferson for the Minnesota Vikings today. But you can also do it with versatile players who are very good in a couple different domains. Brian Westbrook, who Andy Reid worked with for the Philadelphia Eagles, was exceptional at this. Very similar dynamic from Bashard Smith. By the way, Westbrook was a weapon in the red zone. I expect Bashard Smith to become that as well. So I could look at this Chiefs team getting themselves, again, a great value find here from Smith. I think of him, if you go back a few years ago when Tony Pollard into the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys, he did a lot of great things there. I think Bashard Smith, and we talked about this earlier this offseason, could follow that same track. I think he'll be a really good player, and the Chiefs obviously have a history with 7th-round running backs. We've seen that, of course, with Pacheco. So I think across the board, this was a great find, a great addition by the Chiefs, who, by the way, based on reporting, Smith was taking some snaps as a wide receiver in camp already. So they've already got a vision in mind for this young playmaker with all the different ways they want to use him, getting him in the install early, getting him familiar with the offense, getting, the understanding of the schemes. They're letting that happen organically, working his way through that, preparing him for the season, while making sure the way he's going to make this roster and get early opportunities is on special teams. The Chiefs very clearly have a dedicated plan, a dedicated approach to Bashard Smith. They're treating him almost like the way a collegiate program would treat a 5-star prospect, 4-star prospect that they view as the future of their program, saying, okay, we want to find ways to get him on the field, give him some experience, while also training him to eventually be the number 1 guy for us. That's how Kansas City is treating Smith. I think it's the right approach to make because based on any reporting, any data, Bashard Smith looks like a future dynamic weapon in Kansas City.